Hello everyone, welcome back to Dear HOA. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. I always love seeing how far this community reaches. Now, let me tell you about a woman named Megan who inherited an apartment building from her grandmother. 12 units, no HOA. At least, that's what the paperwork said. When she arrived to claim her inheritance, a woman blocked the door and demanded to see her HOA approval. The problem? That HOA didn't exist. It never had. For 7 years, this woman had been collecting fees from tenants for an organization that was nothing more than a name on a sign. Over $150,000 gone. And Megan, a certified public accountant, was about to find out exactly where it went. The first thing I noticed was the sign. Brand new, professionally printed, mounted on a metal post near the entrance. Maplewood Commons, HOA, established 2017. I sat in my rental car, engine still running, staring at those words. My grandmother bought this building in 1989. She owned it for 34 years. She never once mentioned an HOA, not in phone calls, not in letters, not in the final months when we talked about what would happen after she was gone. 2 weeks after her funeral, there was a sign claiming an organization had existed here for 7 years that she never told me about. The Arizona heat pressed against the windows, but I felt cold. I stepped out of the car with the inheritance documents in my hand. The building looked exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. 3 stories, beige stucco, 12 units arranged around a central courtyard with a dry fountain that had never worked. My grandmother had built this from nothing. A Vietnamese immigrant who arrived in Phoenix in 1975, cleaned houses for 15 years, saved every penny, and bought her first property at 42. This building was the physical proof that her life had mattered, and I was here to claim it. A woman appeared in the doorway of the ground floor office before I reached the entrance. Mid-50s, blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing a blazer despite the 100-degree heat. She had the particular posture of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Can I help you?" she called out, but her tone suggested she had no intention of helping anyone. I held up my folder. "I'm Megan Lawson, Eleanor Lawson's granddaughter. I'm here to take possession of the property." The woman didn't move from the doorway. Instead, she smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I'm Patricia Rogers, president of the Maplewood Commons HOA. I'm afraid you can't just walk in here. There are procedures." I'd dealt with gatekeepers before. 10 years as a CPA, auditing companies that didn't want to be audited, had taught me to recognize the difference between legitimate authority and performance. This woman was performing. "Procedures?" I kept my voice neutral. "I have the deed, the will, and the probate court's authorization. What other procedures are there?" Patricia stepped forward, blocking the path to the office door. "Your grandmother was a member of this HOA. As her heir, you'll need to be approved by the board before you can access common areas or make any decisions about the property. It's all in the bylaws." She said bylaws like it was a magic word that ended all arguments. Some of you might be wondering why I didn't just push past her, call the police, assert my rights as the legal owner. But here's what 10 years of forensic accounting teaches you. When someone is hiding something, the worst thing you can do is let them know you're suspicious. You smile, you nod, you ask reasonable questions, and you watch for the cracks. "I'd love to see those bylaws," I said, "and the HOA registration documents, just so I understand the structure." Patricia's smile flickered, just for a moment. "Of course, I'll have our secretary send those over. In the meantime, I'll need you to fill out an application for board review." She handed me a clipboard with a form attached, requesting my social security number, bank account information, and authorization to run a credit check. I took the clipboard, pretended to look it over, and handed it back. "I'll need to have my attorney review this first." Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, take your time, but until you're approved, I can't allow you access to the management office or any HOA records." I nodded, smiled, and walked back to my car. In the rearview mirror, I watched her watch me drive away. She stood there until I turned the corner, arms crossed, guarding the door to an office that legally belonged to me. That night, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Arizona Corporation Commission website. Every legitimate HOA in the state must be registered as a nonprofit corporation. It's not optional, it's the law. I typed Maplewood Commons HOA into the search bar. The results came back in seconds. No matching records found. I tried variations. Nothing. I searched the Maricopa County Recorder's Office next, looking for CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that form the legal backbone of any HOA. Without them, an organization has no authority to collect fees, enforce rules, or restrict property owners. The search returned 0 results. No state registration, no recorded CC&Rs, no legal existence whatsoever. Patricia Rogers was collecting fees for an organization that existed only in her imagination, and on a sign she'd probably ordered from a print shop. The timeline crystallized in my mind. The HOA was established in 2017. That was the year my grandmother's memory began to slip. The year she started forgetting appointments, repeating stories, and losing track of bills. Someone had looked at a confused old woman and seen opportunity. Someone had watched my grandmother's mind fade and decided to take what they could while no one was paying attention. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The anger came slowly, building from somewhere deep. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold kind, the kind that doesn't burn out. My grandmother spent 50 years building something from nothing, and this woman had spent 7 years picking at the corpse before she was even dead. That night, something shifted in me. I'd audited fraud cases before, embezzlement, Ponzi schemes, creative accounting that crossed into criminal, but those were numbers on spreadsheets. Abstract. This was my grandmother's building, her name, her legacy. And suddenly it wasn't about proving a case anymore. It was about making sure the woman who did this understood exactly what she had taken, and from whom. I returned the next morning with copies of every document I had. The deed, the will, the probate authorization, and my grandmother's death certificate. If Patricia Rogers wanted paperwork, I'd give her paperwork. But this time, I also brought a recording app running silently on my phone. Arizona is a one-party consent state. As long as I was part of the conversation, I didn't need her permission. She met me at the same doorway, but her approach had shifted overnight. Less guard dog, more concerned neighbor. Megan, I'm so glad you came back. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. She gestured toward the office. Please come in. Let's talk properly. The management office was small but organized. A desk, 2 filing cabinets, a wall of framed photographs showing building events I didn't recognize. Patricia settled into the chair behind the desk, like she'd been sitting there for decades. She pulled out a thick manila folder and spread its contents across the surface. I want you to understand that your grandmother was a valued member of our community. She supported the HOA from the very beginning. The folder contained meeting minutes, fee schedules, community guidelines, and a document titled Maplewood Commons HOA Membership Agreement. My grandmother's name was typed at the bottom, above a signature line. She signed this in 2017, Patricia said, tapping the agreement. Right after we established the HOA, she was enthusiastic about bringing structure to the community. I looked at the signature. It resembled my grandmother's handwriting, the same loops on the L, the same sharp angle on the E. But I'd seen hundreds of her signatures during probate. After 2015, her handwriting had changed, shakier, less controlled. This signature was too clean, too confident, like someone had traced it from an earlier document. I'd like to see the original, I said. Patricia's smile tightened. The original is in secure storage, for insurance purposes. Of course it was. What exactly does the HOA fee cover? I asked. Patricia brightened, clearly more comfortable discussing money. $150 per unit per month. Common area maintenance, landscaping, security lighting, and administrative costs. I did the math silently. 12 units, $150 each, $1,800 per month, $21,600 per year. Over 7 years, more than $150,000. All for maintenance on a building with peeling paint and a fountain that hadn't worked since I was a child. And the financial records? I asked. Receipts, vendor contracts, bank statements. The brightness faded. Financial records are board-level access only. I'm the property owner, I said. The fees come from tenants living in my building. I have a right to know where that money goes. Patricia leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. Megan, I understand this is overwhelming. You've just lost your grandmother, you're dealing with inheritance issues, and now you're trying to understand a system she was part of for years." She paused, letting the words settle. "Frankly, your grandmother was relieved to have someone else handle the details. Toward the end, she wasn't, well, you know how it was. The confusion, the forgetfulness. She trusted us to take care of things she couldn't manage anymore. There it was, the pivot from bureaucracy to sympathy. The gentle suggestion that my grandmother, the woman who'd built this building from nothing, who'd kept meticulous records for 30 years, who'd sent me handwritten letters until her hands shook too much to hold a pen, had gratefully handed control to a stranger because she was too confused to know better. Patricia wasn't just stealing money. She was rewriting my grandmother's final years into a story where the theft was actually a kindness, where taking advantage of a fading mind was presented as community service. In my work, we have a term for fraud that happens slowly, a little here, a little there, amounts too small to trigger an alarm. $150 doesn't feel like theft. It feels like an annoying bill. But stretch it over years, multiply it across victims who don't talk to each other, and suddenly it's a fortune, built on the assumption that no one will ever add up the numbers. Patricia had refined this into an art form. She'd created just enough paperwork to seem real, targeted people too confused or transient to ask questions, and wrapped the whole operation in the language of community and care. "I'll be requesting all financial records in writing," I said, standing. "You have 10 business days to comply. That's Arizona law." Patricia stood too, her composure cracking. "Megan, I really think you're overcomplicating this. Your grandmother and I had an understanding." "My grandmother is dead," I said. "Whatever you had with her doesn't transfer to me." I walked toward the door, but Patricia's voice followed me. "The current month's fees are due on the 15th, by the way. $300 for your unit assessment, plus the late fees your grandmother's estate accumulated." I stopped, turned. "You're charging my dead grandmother late fees?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "The HOA has expenses. Fees don't stop because someone passes away. Your grandmother would have understood." I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I'd missed before. Not nervousness, not guilt. Certainty. She genuinely believed she was entitled to this money. She'd been doing it so long, telling herself the same story so many times, that the theft had become invisible to her. It wasn't stealing. It was just how things worked. I left without another word. In my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, not driving, just breathing. My grandmother had spent 50 years building something real, and this woman had spent 7 years hollowing it out from the inside, convincing herself she deserved every dollar. The anger I'd felt last night was still there, cold, patient, building. But now it had a shape, a target, and a timeline. She talked about my grandmother like she was doing her a favor, like stealing from a confused old woman was an act of kindness. That's what got me. Not the money. Money can be recovered. But the way she rewrote the story made my grandmother small, helpless, grateful for the help of a thief. My grandmother survived a war, crossed an ocean, and built a life from nothing. She deserved better than to have her final years turned into someone else's justification. The certified letter arrived 4 days later. Urgent, legal notice, stamped in red across the envelope. Inside, a 3-page document on Maplewood Commons letterhead. Notice of intent to file Leanne. The breakdown was meticulous. Unpaid fees, administrative charges, late penalties, something called Community Reserve Assessment. Total, $4,200. Deadline, 14 days to pay, or the HOA would record a lien and pursue foreclosure. For about 30 seconds, my stomach dropped. The document looked real. Case citations, reference numbers, notary stamp. Then I remembered. You can't file a lien on behalf of an organization that doesn't exist. I grabbed my keys and drove to the Maricopa County Recorder's office. I requested a complete title search on Maplewood Commons, every lien, encumbrance, and recorded document going back to 1989. The clerk printed the results on the spot. 34 years of clean ownership. No liens, no HOA assessments, no CCNRs, nothing. Patricia hadn't filed anything because she couldn't. The letter was theater, a theater prop designed to frighten someone who didn't know how to check. Most people would have paid just to make the threat disappear. That's what she was counting on. The same calculation she'd been making for 7 years. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something heavier. The constant deflection, the manufactured paperwork, the escalating threats. It wasn't just exhausting. It was disorienting. Every interaction required me to prove things that shouldn't need proving. That I owned the building. That the HOA wasn't real. That my grandmother hadn't handed her life's work to a stranger. After enough repetition, even obvious truths start to feel uncertain. That's the real damage of this kind of fraud. It doesn't just take your money, it makes you distrust your own judgment. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd missed something, some document, some signature, a loophole that made all of this legitimate. That's what gaslighting does. It turns your own mind against you. I had to keep reminding myself, I'm trained for this. I find fraud for a living. If I'm doubting myself, imagine what the tenants have been feeling for 7 years. My phone rang as I was leaving the recorder's office. Unknown number, Phoenix area code, a woman's voice. Quiet, rushed, afraid. Is this Megan Lawson, Eleanor's granddaughter? I confirmed. I live at Maplewood, Unit 7. I can't talk long. A door closed in the background. That woman, Patricia, she keeps a notebook. Black cover. She writes everything down. Every payment, every tenant, every month, dates, amounts, and signatures when she collects cash. She doesn't trust computers. The woman's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I've paid nearly $13,000 to her over the years. For maintenance, that never happened. I'm tired of pretending it's normal. Where's the notebook? I asked. Her apartment, Unit 1A, desk drawer. A pause. She's been doing this since your grandmother got sick. Before that, she was just another tenant. Then suddenly, she's HOA president, and everyone's writing checks. I don't think your grandmother understood what was happening. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in the parking lot, processing. A physical ledger, handwritten records. 7 years of documented theft. Sitting in a desk drawer in an apartment on my property. Patricia wasn't just blocking me from the management office. She was living in my building, as my tenant. And I hadn't thought to check whether she was paying rent. I pulled up the property records from probate. Unit 1A, lease dated 2016. Tenant, Patricia Rogers. Monthly rent, $1,200. I scrolled through my grandmother's bank statements from the past 7 years. Deposits from Unit 1A, 0. 7 years of free housing, added to the fees she'd collected from other tenants. The total damage wasn't thousands anymore. It was $250,000. All of it documented in a notebook she kept 20 feet from where she'd stood, telling me I had no right to enter my own building. The exhaustion I'd felt earlier was gone. In its place, clarity. I knew where the evidence was. I knew who had it. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. Patricia discovered I was investigating. I don't know who told her. Maybe she noticed my car at the recorder's office. Maybe one of the tenants mentioned my questions. Maybe she'd been watching me all along. What mattered was her response. 3 days after I visited the county, every tenant in the building received an email. One of them forwarded it to me. The subject line, urgent, security alert regarding unauthorized individual. Dear Maplewood Commons residents, it began. It has come to the attention of the HOA board that an individual claiming to be the new owner of our community has been approaching tenants and soliciting personal information. This person has no legal authority over our property and may be attempting identity theft or financial fraud. Please do not provide any personal details to this individual. If approached, document the encounter and notify the HOA immediately. We are consulting with law enforcement and will pursue all available legal remedies to protect our community. My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Patricia had flipped the narrative completely. The actual fraud was now the victim, and I was the criminal. Over the next few days, tenants who had previously nodded politely when I passed now crossed the street to avoid me. One woman pulled her child closer when I walked by. A man shouted from his balcony that I should stop harassing people. The community my grandmother had built for 30 years now looked at me like I was the threat. I went to the building that evening, not to confront Patricia. I knew better than to give her another scene to weaponize. I just wanted to see my grandmother's office one more time, but when I reached the door, my key didn't work. The lock had been changed. I stood there for a long moment, jiggling a key that no longer fit. Then I looked through the window. The desk was still there, the filing cabinets. The old calendar on the wall with everyone's birthdays marked in red, but the frames that had held pictures of me as a child, of my mother, of my grandmother's journey from Vietnam to Phoenix, all gone. In their place, a corkboard covered with HOA announcements and a large printed sign that read, Patricia Rogers, President. I pressed my palm against the glass, staring at the empty spaces where the photographs had hung. The frames had been there for decades. Now they were replaced by fee schedules and meeting notices. I didn't need to explain to myself why it hurt. Some violations don't require analysis. A voice behind me broke the silence. She took them down last month. I turned to find an older man standing a few feet away. Late 60s, gray beard, work boots. The pictures, he continued, said they were cluttering the professional environment. He shook his head. Eleanor would have hated that. He extended his hand. Andrew Brown, Unit 9, 23 years. We talked in the courtyard as the sun went down. Andrew told me how my grandmother had let him defer rent for 3 months when he lost his job in 2008, how she'd driven him to the hospital when he had his heart attack because the ambulance was taking too long. That woman, he nodded toward Patricia's apartment, showed up in 2016, complained about everything. Your grandmother tried to be nice. That was her mistake. In 2017, as my grandmother's memory began slipping, Patricia had started helping with building management, collecting packages, posting notices. Then she'd suggested forming an HOA to share the burden. My grandmother, confused and overwhelmed, had apparently agreed to something she didn't understand. Within months, Patricia had appointed herself president, started collecting fees, and taken control. Nobody questioned it, Andrew said. Eleanor seemed to go along with it, so we figured it was legitimate. By the time we realized something was wrong, it felt too late. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope, 7 years of receipts, every HOA fee he'd ever paid. I kept them because something never felt right. Eleanor handled everything herself for decades. Why did she suddenly need an HOA? He pressed the envelope into my hands. I don't know what you're planning, but whatever it is, I want to help. Someone needs to stop her. Andrew held out his envelope like evidence in a trial. 23 years of trust with my grandmother, undone by 7 years of fraud. She drove me to the hospital when I thought I was dying, he said quietly. Then he looked toward Patricia's window, where a light had just turned on. That woman wouldn't cross the street to help anyone, but she'll cross every line to help herself. Before I left, Andrew mentioned one more thing. Patricia had announced an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday, mandatory attendance. Agenda: voting on security measures to address ongoing harassment. She was going to formalize my exclusion with a Democratic vote. She'll bring the notebook, Andrew said. She always does, uses it to track who's paid, who owes. If you want proof of what she's been doing, that meeting is your chance. Saturday, 4 days. I thanked him and walked to my car. The exhaustion had burned away completely now, replaced by something colder and more useful. She wanted a meeting. She'd get one, but not the kind she was expecting. I spent the next 4 days building my case. Not emotionally, I'd done enough of that. Methodically, the way I'd build any fraud investigation at work. Spreadsheets, timelines, source documents, a clear chain of evidence that would hold up under scrutiny. If Patricia wanted to play bureaucracy, I'd show her what real paperwork looked like. I converted my hotel room into a temporary office. Laptop on the desk, printer borrowed from the business center, documents spread across the bed in chronological order. By Tuesday night, I had a complete timeline of Patricia's operation, from the first HOA fee collected in 2017 to the threatening letter she'd sent me last week. First, I contacted a real estate attorney named Jack Rogers. No relation to Patricia, I checked twice. His office was downtown, a small practice specializing in property disputes and landlord-tenant law. I'd found him through the Arizona State Bar Referral Service, specifically requesting someone with experience in HOA fraud. When I called to schedule, his assistant asked what the case involved. A fake HOA that's been stealing from tenants for 7 years, I said. There was a pause. Mr. Rogers will want to see you today. His office was modest but organized. Law books lining the walls, framed certificates behind the desk, a conference table covered with case files. Jack was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every kind of property dispute imaginable. I laid out everything: the The fake HOA, the collected fees, the forged signatures, the lien threats. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and studied me for a moment. "You're a CPA?" I nodded. "Forensic accounting specialty?" I nodded again. "Good, because what you're describing isn't HOA misconduct. It's criminal fraud, theft by deception, forgery, and you've already done half my job for me." I gave him everything I had. The Arizona Corporation Commission search shows no HOA registration. The county recorder results confirm that no CCNRs existed. Patricia's fake lien notice with its invented case numbers. Andrew's 7 years of receipts. My grandmother's bank statements show Patricia had paid 0 rent since 2017. Jack spread the documents across his conference table and studied them like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. He picked up Andrew's receipts and flipped through them slowly. These are good. Consistent dates, consistent amounts, her signature on several of them. He set them down and reached for the bank statements. And this? 7 years of unpaid rent from a tenant who claims to be running the building. That's not just fraud, that's audacity. "This is solid," he continued, "but it's circumstantial. We can prove the HOA doesn't exist. We can prove fees were collected. What we can't prove yet is where the money went. For criminal charges to stick, we need direct evidence of her receiving and keeping those payments. Bank records, deposit slips, something that shows the money flowing into her personal accounts." "The notebook," I said. Jack looked up. "A tenant told me Patricia keeps a black ledger, handwritten records of every payment, dates, amounts, names. She doesn't trust computers." He leaned back in his chair, processing. "If that notebook exists, and it shows what you think it shows, this case is over. Not just civil liability, criminal prosecution. The district attorney's office loves cases with physical evidence. A handwritten ledger documenting years of theft is exactly the kind of thing that makes prosecutors confident." He paused. "But we can't just take it. Fourth Amendment issues aside, anything obtained improperly could be challenged. We need her to produce it voluntarily, or we need a court order." I had a different idea. "She's holding a meeting Saturday, mandatory attendance for all tenants. According to Andrew, she brings the notebook to every meeting, uses it to check who's paid, who owes, who's behind on fees." I leaned forward. "What if I attend that meeting, as the property owner? What if I ask questions she can't answer without opening that notebook? And what if there are witnesses, a room full of them, when she does?" Jack was quiet for a moment, turning the idea over. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "That's not bad. That's actually not bad at all." He pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's talk strategy. In a fraud investigation, we have a saying, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. Patricia had spent 7 years building a paper trail she thought protected her. Meeting minutes, fee schedules, official documents with stamps and signatures. But paper trails cut both ways. Every document she'd created to legitimize her theft was also evidence of that theft. She had documented her own crimes in meticulous detail, and on Saturday, she'd show everyone exactly where. We spent 3 hours mapping the approach. Jack would draft a formal letter asserting my rights as a property owner to attend any meeting held on my premises. Under Arizona law, a landlord cannot be barred from common areas of their own building, regardless of what any HOA claims. If Patricia tried to exclude me, she'd be violating my property rights, giving us grounds for an immediate injunction and adding another charge to the growing list. More importantly, Jack prepared a set of questions designed to expose the HOA's illegitimacy without triggering Patricia's defenses. Not accusations. Questions. The kind that seems reasonable on the surface until you realize there's no honest answer. When was the HOA registered with the state? Who elected the current board members? And where are the election records? Where are the annual financial reports required by Arizona statute? Which bank holds the HOA operating account? And who are the signatories? Each question had only 2 possible outcomes. Either Patricia would lie, creating additional fraud charges and perjury exposure, or she'd refuse to answer, making her evasion obvious to every tenant in the room. And when she reached for that notebook to prove her legitimacy or check her records, she'd be handing us exactly what we needed, in front of witnesses, on the record. Jack also prepared a contingency. If Patricia tried to have me removed from the meeting, he would be waiting outside with a phone call to the Phoenix Police Department's non-emergency line. Trespassing on a property owner on their own property would be enough to justify police involvement. And once police were involved, the situation would shift from a civil dispute to something with criminal dimensions. She's used bureaucracy as a weapon for 7 years, Jack said. It's time someone used it back. The day before the meeting, I drove past Maplewood Commons one more time. The building looked the same. Faded stucco, dry fountain, 12 units arranged around a courtyard my grandmother had designed herself. The paint was still peeling. The landscaping is still overgrown. $150,000 in maintenance fees, and not a single visible improvement. Lights flickered on in various windows as the sun went down. Tenants coming home from work, making dinner, living their lives in apartments they had been paying phantom fees on for years. Most of them still had no idea what was happening. By tomorrow night, they would. I parked across the street and watched Patricia's window in Unit 1A. The light was on. She was in there, probably preparing her agenda, rehearsing her speech about community safety and outside threats, maybe reviewing that notebook one more time to make sure her numbers added up. She had no idea what was coming. She thought Saturday was about consolidating her power, about formally excluding the troublesome granddaughter who had been asking too many questions. She thought she was in control. Tomorrow night, I will walk into that meeting with my attorney, my documents, and my questions. I would stand in the building my grandmother built and reclaim it from the woman who had hollowed it out. Patricia thought she was hosting a vote to exclude me. She was wrong. She was hosting her own exposure, and by the time she realized it, there would be a room full of witnesses who had seen everything. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. The community room on the ground floor of Maplewood Commons was filled with folding chairs arranged in neat rows. About 20 tenants had shown up, some because they believed in the HOA, some because they were curious, some because Patricia had made attendance mandatory and they didn't want trouble. I stood at the back of the room with Jack, watching people file in. Andrew caught my eye from the third row and gave me a small nod. He'd spread the word quietly to a few tenants he trusted. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they knew something was about to change. Patricia stood at the front, behind a folding table she'd set up as a makeshift podium. She wore a navy blazer, pearls, full makeup, dressed for authority. A stack of papers sat on the table beside her, and there, positioned prominently where everyone could see it, was a black notebook. The ledger. 7 years of theft, documented in her own handwriting, sitting in plain sight like a trophy she was too proud to hide. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was too busy shuffling papers, checking her phone, projecting the confidence of someone who believed she was about to win. Jack stepped forward and handed a document to the tenant nearest the door, a copy of my property deed, and a letter asserting my legal right to attend. "Please pass this to Mrs. Rogers," he said calmly. The paper made its way through the crowd, hand to hand, until it reached the front table. Patricia picked it up, scanned it, and her expression shifted. Not panic, not yet. Irritation. The kind that comes when an obstacle appears in a path you thought was clear. She looked up, searching the room until her eyes found me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she smiled, tight, controlled, performative. "It seems we have a guest," she announced to the room. "Miss Lawson has decided to join us despite not being a member of this community." She set the letter down dismissively. "However, since she claims to be the property owner, I suppose we can allow her to observe, as long as she doesn't disrupt our proceedings." She gestured toward an empty chair in the back row. "Please, have a seat." I didn't sit. Instead, I walked forward, down the center aisle, until I was standing about 10 feet from her table. Jack followed, positioning himself to my left. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. "Before we begin," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I have a few questions about the HOA, for the record." Patricia's smile tightened. "This isn't a Q&A session, Miss Lawson. We have an agenda." "When was this HOA registered with the Arizona Corporation Commission?" The question cut through her prepared script. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The Arizona Corporation Commission. Every legitimate HOA in this state must be registered as a non-profit corporation." "When was Maplewood Commons HOA registered?" Patricia's hand moved almost unconsciously toward the black notebook, then stopped. "Our registration is being updated. There were some administrative issues." "So, it's not currently registered?" I asked. No accusation in my tone, just clarification. A murmur rippled through the room. Patricia straightened her shoulders. These are technical matters that the board handles internally. They're not relevant to tonight's agenda. What about the CC&Rs? I continued. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions that form the legal foundation of any HOA. Where are they recorded? Silence. Patricia's jaw tightened. Our governing documents are kept in secure storage. I checked the Maricopa County Recorder's Office, I said. There are no CC&Rs recorded for this property. Not in 2017. Not ever. The murmur grew louder. I saw tenants glancing at each other, confusion spreading through the room like a slow wave. Miss Lawson, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, Patricia started, but I wasn't finished. Who elected the current board members? Where are the election records? Where are the annual financial reports required by Arizona statute? Each question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Patricia's composure was cracking now, small fissures appearing in the mask. These records exist. They're simply not available for public review. Not available? I gestured at the room. These are the people who've been paying fees for 7 years. They're not entitled to see how their money was spent? Andrew stood up from the third row. I've paid almost $13,000 to this HOA, he said, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. I've never seen a financial report. I've never voted in an election. I've never received a single document explaining where my money went. He looked around at the other tenants. Has anyone? Silence. People shook their heads. One woman in the back raised her hand tentatively. I asked for receipts once. She told me financial records were board-level access only. Patricia's hand was on the notebook now, gripping it like a lifeline. This is exactly the kind of disruption I warned you about. Miss Lawson is trying to confuse you, to undermine the community we've built together. Then show them, I said. Show everyone in this room where their money went. You have records, don't you? I pointed at the notebook. You bring that ledger to every meeting. You use it to track payments. So, open it. Show us the accounting. Patricia's hand froze on the notebook. I watched the color drain from her face, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. Her fingers, which had been gripping the leather cover with such confidence moments ago, went slack. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, staring at the ledger like it had transformed into something dangerous, which, of course, it had. 7 years of meticulous records, 7 years of evidence. And she'd brought it herself. The room was completely silent now. Every eye was on Patricia, waiting. She looked down at the notebook, then back at me, then at the faces of the tenants who had trusted her for 7 years. I could see her calculating, trying to find a way out, an excuse, a deflection that would let her survive this moment. But there was nothing. The questions I'd asked had no good answers. The notebook she'd relied on to track her theft was now the thing that would expose it. I don't have to show you anything, she said finally. Her voice had changed, higher, tighter, stripped of the authority she'd been projecting all evening. You're not a member of this HOA. You have no right. There is no HOA, Jack said, speaking for the first time. He stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. I'm Jack Rogers, Miss Lawson's attorney. I've conducted a thorough search of state and county records. No organization called Maplewood Commons, HOA, has ever been registered with the Arizona Corporation Commission. No CC&Rs have ever been recorded with Maricopa County. No elections have ever been filed with any regulatory body. He paused, letting each word land. Which means every fee you've collected for the past 7 years was taken under false pretenses. That's not just civil fraud, it's criminal theft. The room erupted. Tenants turning to each other, voices rising, anger and confusion mixing into chaos. Patricia grabbed the notebook and clutched it to her chest, backing away from the table. This is lies, she said, but her voice was barely audible over the noise. This is all lies. I've given everything to this community. You've taken everything from this community, Andrew said, standing again, and now everyone knows it. I watched Patricia retreat toward the door, the notebook still pressed against her like a shield. She looked smaller now, diminished. The authority she'd wielded for 7 years had evaporated in less than 15 minutes. At the doorway, she turned back one last time, searching for something. An ally? An escape? A way to undo what had just happened. She found nothing. Just a room full of people who finally understood what she'd been doing to them. And me, standing in the building my grandmother built, watching her empire collapse. Patricia made it as far as the parking lot. I don't know where she thought she was going. Her apartment was in the building she was fleeing. Her car was parked 20 feet from the community room door, and a crowd of angry tenants was following her outside. But panic doesn't think strategically, it just runs. She was fumbling with her keys, the black notebook still clutched under one arm, when the police cruiser pulled into the lot. 2 officers stepped out. One of them was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and a detective's badge clipped to her belt. She surveyed the scene, Patricia frozen by her car, the crowd of tenants, Jack and me standing near the building entrance, and walked directly toward us. "Miss Lawson?" I nodded. "Detective Francis Myers, Phoenix Police Department, Financial Crimes Unit. Your attorney contacted us earlier this week." She glanced at Patricia, who was now backing against her car like a cornered animal. "Looks like we arrived at an interesting time." Jack had called the police non-emergency line before the meeting started, alerting them that evidence of ongoing fraud might be presented publicly. He'd been careful not to make accusations, just observations, a fake HOA, collected fees, a property owner seeking to document what was happening. The detective had agreed to have a unit nearby, just in case something developed that warranted immediate attention. Something had. Detective Myers approached Patricia with the calm, measured pace of someone who had done this many times. "Mrs. Rogers, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have some questions about the Maplewood Commons Homeowners Association." Patricia's composure, already fractured, shattered completely. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is harassment. That woman," she pointed at me, "has been harassing me for weeks, making false accusations." "Ma'am, I'm not here because of accusations. I'm here because the Arizona Corporation Commission has no record of any HOA registered at this address, because the Maricopa County Recorder has no CCNRs on file, and because multiple residents have provided documentation of fees paid to an organization that appears not to exist." The detective's voice was patient but firm. "Those are facts, not accusations, and facts require explanation." The notebook. Patricia was still holding it, pressed against her chest like a child clutching a security blanket. Detective Myers noticed. "What's that you're holding, Mrs. Rogers?" Patricia's grip tightened. "It's personal. Private records. You have no right. If it's personal, you're welcome to keep it. But if it contains records related to HOA operations, fee collections, payments, financial transactions, then it may be relevant to our investigation." The detective paused. "Of course, if you'd prefer, we can obtain a warrant, but that tends to make things more complicated for everyone involved." I watched Patricia calculate. She'd spent 7 years building a system designed to look legitimate. Official letterhead, meeting minutes, fee schedules. Everything documented, everything organized, everything designed to create the appearance of authority. And now that same documentation, her pride, her proof of control, was about to become evidence of her crimes. She could refuse to hand over the notebook, force the police to get a warrant, buy herself a few hours, maybe a day. But the tenants had already seen her clutch it like a guilty secret. They'd already heard her refuse to show the financial records. Refusing again would only confirm what everyone now suspected. "Fine." Patricia thrust the notebook toward Detective Myers. "Take it. You'll see everything is in order. I've done nothing but serve this community for 7 years. The detective accepted the ledger with gloved hands, flipping it open to a random page. I couldn't see the contents from where I stood, but I saw her expression change, a slight tightening around the eyes, the look of someone who has just found exactly what they were looking for. "Mrs. Rogers, I'm going to ask you to accompany me to the station. You're not under arrest at this time, but I strongly recommend you contact an attorney before answering any questions." Patricia was guided into the back of the cruiser. No handcuffs, not yet. But the door closed with a finality that echoed across the parking lot. 20 tenants stood in the Arizona evening, watching the woman who had controlled their building for 7 years be driven away for questioning. Some looked angry, some looked relieved. A few looked like they still couldn't quite believe what had happened. Andrew walked over to stand beside me. 7 years, he said quietly. 7 years I paid that woman, and it took you 3 weeks to bring it all down. I shook my head. It took my grandmother 34 years to build something worth protecting. 3 weeks to expose a fraud is nothing compared to that. The crowd didn't disperse after the cruiser left. They stood in clusters, talking in low voices, comparing notes. I paid over $8,000. She told me it was mandatory, said I'd be evicted if I didn't pay. I asked for receipts once. She said I was being difficult. Story after story, surfacing now that the silence had been broken. 7 years of small thefts, exposed in 15 minutes. 7 years of isolation, ended by one public question. They weren't just angry at Patricia anymore. They were angry at themselves for not seeing it sooner. But mostly, they were relieved. Someone had finally said what they had all been afraid to ask. Detective Myers returned an hour later, after Patricia had been transported to the station. She found me in the courtyard, sitting on the edge of the broken fountain, reviewing documents with Jack. "The notebook is comprehensive," she said, sitting down across from us. 7 years of entries, names, dates, amounts, signatures. She even noted when people paid in cash versus check. She shook her head slowly. "I've investigated financial crimes for 15 years. I've never seen someone document their own fraud so thoroughly." Jack asked the question I was thinking. "What happens now?" Detective Myers pulled out a small notepad. "We'll need formal statements from as many tenants as possible. Anyone who paid fees, anyone who has receipts or bank records. The more documentation, the stronger the case." She looked at me. "Your records are already solid. The state searches, the county records, your grandmother's bank statements showing no rent payments from Unit 1A. Combined with the ledger, we're looking at theft by deception, fraud, potentially forgery if any of those signatures were faked." She paused. "The total amount appears to exceed $150,000. That's a Class 2 felony in Arizona. If convicted, she's looking at significant prison time." I thought about my grandmother, about the building she'd maintained for 3 decades, about the tenants she'd treated like family, the ones who'd trusted Patricia because Eleanor seemed to trust her too. My grandmother hadn't trusted Patricia. She'd been too confused to understand what was happening, and Patricia had used that confusion to steal everything she could. "There's one more thing," Detective Myers said. "The notebook shows she stopped paying rent in 2017. Same year, she started the HOA scheme. Your attorney mentioned you have records of that?" I nodded. 7 years of unpaid rent, over $100,000 based on the lease terms. The detective made a note. "That's a separate charge, theft of services. We'll add it to the file." She stood, tucking her notepad away. "This is going to take time. Interviews, forensic accounting, possible grand jury. But I want you to know, you did the hard part. You built a case that would make any prosecutor confident. Most fraud victims never get this far." She shook my hand and walked back to her cruiser. Jack and I sat in the courtyard as the last light faded from the sky. The building was quiet now. Tenants back in their apartments, processing what had happened, probably making calls to family and friends. Tomorrow, the questions would start, the formal statements. The slow machinery of justice is grinding into motion. But tonight, for the first time since I'd arrived in Phoenix, the building felt like it belonged to me. 3 months later, Patricia Rogers pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts: theft by deception, fraud, forgery, and theft of services. The plea deal spared her a trial, but not the consequences. 4 years in Arizona State Prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. Full restitution ordered, $156,000 to the tenants, $108,000 to me for unpaid rent. Her assets were frozen pending liquidation: the car, a small savings account, jewelry she'd bought with stolen money. It wouldn't cover everything. These things never do. But it was something. It was accountability. The day of sentencing, I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched Patricia stand before the judge. She looked smaller than I remembered. The blazer was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The confidence that had filled every room she entered had drained away completely. When the judge read the sentence, she didn't react, just stood there, staring straight ahead as if she'd already left her body and was watching from somewhere far away. I didn't feel satisfaction. I thought I would, but I didn't. Mostly, I felt tired and ready for this chapter to be over. I kept the building. Some people thought I was crazy. Why hold on to a property with so much baggage, so many bad memories attached? But Maplewood Commons wasn't about Patricia. It was about my grandmother. 34 years she'd owned this place. 34 years of rent collected on time, maintenance handled personally, tenants treated like neighbors instead of income sources. I wasn't going to let 7 years of fraud erase 3 decades of care. I hired a licensed property management company. Real credentials, real insurance, real accountability. I had Jack draft new lease agreements for every tenant, clearly stating there was no HOA, never had been, never would be. Rent stayed the same, no increases for the first year. A small gesture, but gestures matter after betrayal. Andrew became my unofficial liaison with the tenants. He knew everyone, remembered every birthday, and understood the unwritten rules of the community my grandmother had built. When I couldn't be there, which was often, since my job was still in Chicago, he kept me informed. Who needed repairs? Who was struggling with rent? Who had concerns they were too shy to raise directly? He didn't want payment for it. Your grandmother helped me when I needed it, he said. This is me returning the favor, 30 years late. The other tenants took longer to trust me. I understood. They'd trusted Patricia, and that trust had cost them thousands of dollars and years of peace of mind. Why should they trust another outsider claiming authority over their homes? I didn't push. I just showed up when I said I would, fixed things that needed fixing, answered questions honestly, even when the answers were, I don't know, or I'm still figuring it out. Trust isn't rebuilt with grand gestures. It's rebuilt with small consistencies, repeated over time. People ask if I'm angry at Patricia. The honest answer is, not anymore. Anger takes energy, and I've spent all my energy on rebuilding. What I feel now is something closer to responsibility. My grandmother couldn't protect this place in the end. Her mind wouldn't let her. So, I have to protect it now. Not just from fraud, but from neglect, from carelessness, from all the small failures that let someone like Patricia take root in the first place. That's the real inheritance, not the building, the obligation. A week after the sentencing, I finally cleaned out my grandmother's office. The property management company needed the space, and I'd been putting it off for months. Most of it was routine, old files, outdated equipment, supplies that had expired years ago. But in the bottom drawer of her desk, buried under tax returns from the 1990s, I found an envelope, unsealed. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, shaky, uncertain, the penmanship of someone whose hands no longer obeyed her mind. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter, dated 3 months before she died. My dear Megan, I know something is wrong with the building. The woman in 1A, Patricia, has been taking money. I see it, but I cannot prove it. My mind is not what it was. I forget things. I lose papers. She knows this. She uses it. I am writing this now while I can still write, so you will know. When I am gone, please look carefully. Please protect what I built. I trust you. You were always the smart one. Love, Grandma. She had known. Even as her memory failed, even as Patricia exploited her confusion, some part of her had understood what was happening. She couldn't stop it herself. But she'd left me a message, hidden where only I would find it, trusting that I would finish what she couldn't. I sat in her chair, holding the letter, and cried for the first time since this all began. Not from sadness, from something more complicated. Grief and gratitude and resolve, all tangled together. My grandmother had built something worth protecting. She'd trusted me to protect it, and I had. The building is quiet now. The fountain still doesn't work. I'm getting quotes to fix it. The paint is fresh. The landscaping is recovering. 12 families live here, paying fair rent for decent apartments, knowing exactly who owns the building and exactly where their money goes. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But it's honest. And after 7 years of lies, honesty feels like enough.